Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Julia Hope Brightwell. So Julia is a Biodanza teacher, the first one we've had on the show, so I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. She's also an artist and heavily into holistic health, has all sorts of things in her background I'm sure we'll get into as well. So Julia, welcome.
Hello.
Where are you in the world today?
I live in East Devon.
So the southwest of the UK for our international listeners, a very pleasant green part of the country. I was down in Torquay for a while.
Yes, it is very beautiful. I live quite near the sea here as well.
Nice. And how did you get interested in the body? What's your journey into this?
Well, I suppose for most of the early years of my life, I wasn't very comfortable in my own skin. So the early part of my development was really trying almost to escape that. So I did lots of meditation and spiritual searching from my teens to my mid-20s mainly, and even into my early 30s, I would say. And it was only really when I found dance of different sorts that I started to feel really good in my own skin.
Great. So you weren't so much connected to yourself, and you tried to do the kind of spiritual bypass of the body, the kind of trying to transcend and get out of the body. Is that right?
Absolutely. That is exactly it. And actually, you know, when you are meditating or chanting or various things, you do actually feel really great because you do feel quite blissful. But
yeah,
the reality is, as soon as that stops and you get back into just being a physical person, it's uncomfortable again. So I realised it was sort of a dead end.
Yeah, that sort of trying to bliss out and transcend the body. We've had various teachers talk about that on the show, and I think it's really important. It's kind of like a trap of spirituality, isn't it? Because it feels so good to, you know, to bliss out and go into those states, but then they're temporary, and you always come back down to the reality of life here on Earth.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't have put it better myself. And, you know, I wanted to feel really comfortable and really good in myself, and I wasn't getting it that way. I mean, I certainly had sort of, you know, times out, really. That was all it was, really. So, yeah. So then my first thing was I danced at school, and I was so self-conscious that I didn't take up the dance teacher's invitation to come to her after school classes, because she obviously saw that I had a real feel for music. But I was so uncomfortable with myself. I just felt, you know, I wasn't the right sort of type of person to be doing that, so I didn't go. And then later on, I found something called seroc, which is French jive.
Yep. And
that was quite, you know, a sort of a very guided way of dancing. But I liked escaping in the music to an extent, but it was quite formulaic, so you couldn't just do your own thing at all. So then it wasn't expressive in the way I really wanted fully. So then I was looking for something else.
So it's this forms a kind of freedom journey that I see a lot of embodiment people go on, which is that we start with something formulaic, and that sounds negative, but I guess the good side there is this guidance and structure, and, you know, left foot here, right foot there. And then at a certain point you go, well, hang on, I actually want to express myself here.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And so the next part for me was I moved to Dartmoor initially in Devon, and I met a teacher there who, she did authentic dance and dance therapy, and she also specialised herself in something called butoh, a Japanese form of dance.
Oh yeah, that's hardcore. I'd love to get a butoh teacher on the show. It's quite extreme, butoh.
Yes, it is. Her name is Louise Money. She was incredible, and I sort of explored lots of expressive ways of being authentic with her, and it really gave me a sort of an access into wanting more. So that was the next step from the seroc, the French jive. And then I found 5 rhythms, and did that for quite a long time with a teacher in Devon who actually now has changed to be a teacher of movement medicine. And I followed him for quite a while. I really enjoyed the dance of that. But I didn't feel drawn to sort of teach other people that, nor the seroc, nor the other forms. So that was the sort of development. And I realised that although I loved the 5 rhythms of the movement medicine, it was great for expression. And it was really great for accessing the inner part of you in the physical, in that embodiment way. But I felt like I was just expressing what was there. And there was no real change in me.
Well, that wasn't Yakov, was it?
Yes, it was. I love Jakob,
We
yes.
had him on the show. It's one of my favourite episodes. He was so great to interview. He's kind of the founder of this big deal system that's spread across the world, but he was very down to earth and easy to get on with on the show. I really liked having him on. Yeah. And so what was, so say more about that missing piece. This doesn't say anything bad about fire rhythms. Obviously, different practices for different people and, different things call us, don't they? But what was the missing piece? I didn't quite get that. Was that it was just kind of expressing what was there rather than...
Yes, I mean, for me, I mean, like you say, everyone has different paths. And I think some people are very, very comfortable with social connection and groups and things like that. And I'm not. I'm an introvert naturally. And I never really enjoyed group situations very much. And it wasn't really helping me with that at all. It was helping me connect with my individualistic expression, but it wasn't helping me any further than that. So it was the social bridge, I suppose, of expressing the authentic self with others. And also that real soft-hearted expression, which Biodanza does have. It sort of expresses looking at people really softly through almost like the eyes of the heart. That's the best way I can express it, so that you look at them sort of in an unconditional way and you express and connect in a very soft way, which I don't find that Five Rhythms has that very much.
Yeah, there can be, and again, this might not be the practice. It depends on the teacher. I don't want the Five Rhythms fundamentalists to get upset out there, but it's there's a kind of expressive quality to it rather than necessarily more that connecting quality. And while Five Rhythms may have partner and group practices, it's not the central theme, connection, the central theme of the class, is it?
Absolutely, and again, like I say, it's because it's what you need in your own personal journey. And for me, I did do it for about 10 years, so I needed it for about 10 years, but I needed something else in order to become more myself, more my fullness, and comfortable in all those different ways of expression. So other people might already have that piece of the jigsaw, so they don't need to do that, but I didn't have the full experience for me to be able to really come into my comfortableness in all that.
And so, I mean, this is our main theme, I guess, for today's Biodanza. Yeah. Is it pronounced Biodanza or Biodanza? I've heard both.
Well, I say Biodanza because bio is the English way of saying life, but Biodanza is the more international way. But in a way, that's not how it's the It depends. If you were abroad, you'd probably say Biodanza. A lot of people in England say Biodanza, so I don't think it matters really.
Let's do it the bloody English way, Julia. And Biodanza.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, yeah, because Biodanza always felt a bit odd to me. Okay, but that makes sense because it has is it a South American root?
Yeah, that's right, absolutely, and it translates in English as the dance of life.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about, when you meet people at a party and you tell them you're a Biodanza teacher, like what's the spiel? Like, what do you say as the basic? This is what it is.
Well, that's a difficult thing because it's quite difficult to put in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's basically, overall, it's a system of dances and focuses that create integration, and they work with all the ways that humans are perceived by the creator, Orlando, to express themselves. So there's something called the 5 lines of Biodanza, and that's vitality, which is all about connecting really strongly with just that life force within and that capacity to be healthy and vital, resting when you need to, listening to your body. So that's the vitality line. And then there's the affectivity line, which is about contact with others. It's like the brotherhood, sisterhood, human kindness part of Biodanza, where you care for people, and there's touch and caress within that as well, which is, sort of healing those early wounds that might have happened for people who weren't picked up or rocked as a child or didn't have any very nourishing contact with others. Some people don't, and it works very much on that. And also the fact that we are in this, physical skin, and we're sensual and we can feel everything, so it's got contact in there. And then the 3rd line, they're not in any particular order, but is sexuality, really connecting with the sexual energy that we have, which is very much, again, about the force for life and procreation, creativity, passion. And then the other lines are transcendence, linking with that spiritual side of yourself, which I used to just escape to and not have anything other than that when I was young. And the 5th line is creativity. So that very expressive way of, creatively expressing yourself in dance.
Okay, so let's dig into these a little bit. And, the first thing that occurs to me is how kind of, South American this is culture. As someone who lived in Brazil and has had a Colombian girlfriend, I've had, reasonable exposure to kind of South American people, various countries. And where exactly was the founder from?
Yeah, I feel embarrassed to say. I think it was Chile, but I sort of sometimes forget that point. I should have looked at my facts.
No, it's okay. It's just it's a big place. I don't want listeners to think that's sort of putting with and brush. So yeah, some good somatic works come out of Chile for various people we've had on.
He really lived there. I mean, he did live in more than one place, and he was born in one place and lived in another. He had trouble, with the wars and everything, and had to
he's deceased now, isn't he? I looked at getting him on the show, and rudely he was dead. So
yes.
I couldn't get him on the show.
Yes.
So a great loss, I hear, because I know a lot of people that really do look up to him. So these aspects strike me as having a particular flavour, which to me feels South American. Though we could certainly say it has a flavour if people don't like that. The idea of life force, of connection, of sexuality. It's a different starting place from a sort of dry Northern European point of view, isn't it?
Oh yes, absolutely, and I think that's why it's been a little bit slower to translate into England and Britain, because it doesn't really necessarily sit naturally with people's separateness and their sort of controlled aspects, which we've learned, in terms of social conduct, in this society to some extent.
So let's maybe take these apart bit by bit, because I think any one of them is hugely juicy. So like this idea of life force or vitality. Like there is a way in which when I see people that are doing embodied practice, generally they're kind of more alive and like babies stare at me. And, there's this kind of life that you see in a baby, but you also see in older people who do embodiment. And I was just interviewing Joel Levy yesterday, who's quite an elderly gentleman, but he's just got that vibrancy to him. And it strikes me that often just gets sucked. Like I'm going to London to do a talk today, and I know I'm going to be on the tube surrounded by people who've had that sucked out of them by the time they're 30, let alone by the time they're 60. So do you want to say a little bit about this kind of vibrancy and this life force? Because that seems very strong in Biodanza as a practice.
Yes, it is. I mean, what the term we use is the vital impetus. And it's basically that there's, in every life form, whether it's a plant, an animal, and humans at their instinctive level have it as well, that we're actually geared for life. So anything that's not life, we are naturally geared to move away from if we're living from instinct or naturalness. But as you know, the world we live in, which is very technological, it's very orderly, it sort of basically traps the instincts to an extent. So it makes them not function. They're there in you, but you can't access them always because you've been told, for instance, in school from an early age, sit still, don't move, even though you're really uncomfortable in your physical body, which is overruling your instinct to move. Or you have a desire to go, to the toilet as a child, and you have to wait till lunchtime or break time. And all the time, it's basically separating you from your natural instincts. And the feeling of this is that the body is actually, a genius in a sense in itself of completely self-regulating and healing. It's continuously doing that. We know that I think it's 7 years for the whole body to have regenerated right down to the bones. And it's all the time trying to be the best it can be for you without us consciously knowing it. And Biodanza works with the vital force in that sense, that we inspire expression of the instincts, and also to work in the line of vitality, you actually, physiologically working that vital force more, which again is creating more connection. So there are many aspects to it, but that's one sort of way of describing it.
Great. And in terms of like what reduces it, as I say, this sitting, my niece who's 8 has just been diagnosed with ADHD, and I was running around the park with her the other day, and I was just thinking, she doesn't have an illness. She's fine. She's just not sitting in a chair all day, And I'm not saying that can't be a very real condition for some people or whatever, but it seems to be very easily diagnosed now. But that's just a more extreme example of, a more typical thing in society. We're asked to be still. We're asked to, the one reluctance I have to sort of buy into this story, and I largely agree with you, is that a certain amount of sort of socializing and self-control is a good thing, right? I mean, it's not just like I don't just take a shit whenever my bowels are full. Hey, wait, there's a toilet nearby.
No, I totally agree. But the thing is, it's sort of gone off balance, hasn't it? I mean, yeah, yes, if people were just wildly following their instincts and not having any social connection and social awareness, it would be a bit of a crazy world. But it's become the other extreme. You know, it's become very much centered on the mind and leading everything through the mind, so not really listening to the body at all. So ideally, this is the holistic thing for me. You know, ideally, you are in contact with both your mind, your capacity to, you know, discern and process and think, but also your emotions, your physical well-being, your spiritual well-being. All these things, ideally for me, they're all accessible, and that, you know, you create a whole being. And I think Biodanza does very well at working to even out the bits that are missing or that you've had to suppress, and to create more of a balance within that.
Yeah, lovely. And for me, a lot of that life force, it goes back to Freud and other people more far older than him, that comes from that kind of libido, that sexual energy of that. That's another way in which people are repressed, right? In repressing that sexual energy, they actually reduce a part of themselves. I remember a married friend of mine said, I found this man who wasn't a husband very attractive, and I didn't want to feel that, and I didn't allow myself to feel that, and I squashed that feeling down. And as I did that, I realized I was killing part of myself, was how she put it. And I thought, that is interesting. Now, I'm not saying she should have gone off and slept with him. You know, she could have felt it without acting on it. But it was very interesting, a little micro example to me of how repressing sexuality is actually repressing that which is sort of right at the core of our life.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's where, you know, I don't really like the word laboratory, but some teachers in Biodanza say Biodanza is like a laboratory where you explore things, but only inside the classroom of the laboratory, and then, you know, you can integrate that outside and do that in a different way. But it allows you to explore things in a safe, contained environment where it's not expected. My teacher, who's the director of the Dorset School, he often says, you know, if you had a connection in the space in a deep way with somebody in a sexual way or an intimate way, don't expect to have a relationship or marry them outside of the Biodanza class, because it's not about that. It's about exploring your own sort of way of expressing yourself in a contained environment.
So my experience of Biodanza classes is very connecty. And that used to sort of really repulse me. You know, I can see what you said earlier about it being kind of a little countercultural. There's a certain time in my life where these days I can kind of take it for what it is and enjoy it. But I remember there being a lot of eye gazing and hand holding, and that sort of connection side of it is very strong as well.
Yes, I think there was an emphasis on that, maybe more so in this country. I mean, I'm trying to think about when I've danced abroad. I mean, it's very important for all Biodanza teachers to say that everything's an invitation. You see, the principle for me of Biodanza is that it's working with the pleasure principles. So if you are repulsed or turned off by what you don't enjoy in the class, and you don't feel that you have the choice of doing something slightly different or stepping out for a time, then basically it's not working on the principles that it's designed for, which is to work with pleasure and to work with making you feel really good, sensually, physically, emotionally, everything. And actually, we don't want it to have a negative effect.
I love this idea of working with pleasure, because a lot of personal growth or, you know, martial arts or yoga I've been involved with, it's like you have to be disciplined, you have to work hard, you have to suffer. It's almost like, well, if it's hurting, it must be good for you. You know, it's a very kind of Christian almost ethic that's built into a lot of these practices, you know, that's in there. The Shinto too, actually. I shouldn't just blame the Christians. But this ethic of kind of suffering equals growth. You know, no pain, no gain, they'd say in a modern gym, you know. And this is a completely different orientation to say, okay, let's actually go with pleasure.
Absolutely. And, you know, the belief is that rather than focusing on the wounds or the things that are there in every one of us, you amplify the health. So by amplifying the healthy part, that actually helps everything, you know, without focusing directly on it. So it's a bit like, I don't know if you've heard of Esther Hicks' emotional guidance system.
I don't know. No, what's that?
Well, basically, in the emotional guidance system, it talks about all the emotions are a guide for you as to what is, you know, right for you as a soul, as an essence, as a developing person. So if you're feeling the more positive emotions in the body, it's actually guiding you in that direction to, that's the way that fits you. And the other emotions aren't bad per se, but they're just showing you that doesn't suit me, that doesn't fit me. That, you know, if I'm feeling really uncomfortable and I feel really angry, something's not quite right for me. And it's sort of almost just like information in a way.
Yeah, one of my teachers used to say, you know, the telephone's ringing, pick it up, don't smash it, don't hide it under you know, don't drown it in alcohol, don't pretend it isn't happening, pick up the phone, get the message.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you know, I feel like we are just here, you know, because I am a very sort of spiritual being in a sense, but I'm trying to focus on the embodiment in a big way. But I feel we're here to just be as free as possible. And by free, I don't mean without rules. I just mean free from conditioning that limits our natural way of behaving, but with complete awareness. So awareness includes awareness of others as well as yourself and the environment and, you know, other things.
So I hear what you're saying as including kind of mind and discernment. I can hear that in your tone of voice and your manner as well. Like I've had, if I'm honest, I've had a few negative experiences with Biodanza of sort of gooey hippies who want to touch me and hug me a lot. And I'm like sometimes not up for it. And sort of looking around and seeing like a total lack of kind of discipline or boundaries. I'm not getting that from you at all. And you were recommended to me, and I, you know, checked you out because I thought, okay, this person isn't in the gooiness. But it seems to me that what you're saying could be misheard by those who are kind of a certain new agey mindset.
In what sense could it be misheard?
Well, in terms of, well, just do what you want. No boundaries, just follow pleasure. You're the boss of you. No one tells you what to do. It's all about just do whatever the hell you want.
Okay, so I haven't talked to you about two very big principles in Biodanza. One of them is feedback, and the other one is reciprocity. So that things have to be reciprocal. So, for instance, if I was teaching about encounters, which I think you're talking about the eye gazing and the hand holding and the stroking. So, what I would say at the very beginning is that the first encounter is with yourself. You can only come to meet another if you're comfortable with yourself. So I would say that if you want to be with yourself, we'd have a gesture just to make that clear, like hands on the heart and maybe close the eyes so you're within. Or you could have the eyes open, but you've got your hands on your own physical self so that you're showing I'm connected to myself right now and I'm not opening my physical body language to another person. So, you know, anybody in feedback should see, well, that person's not open. I'm not going to approach them. I'm not going to put them in a position that compromises where they are. And even when you do meet someone and you sort of walk towards them, you should be in feedback. So the point where you meet might be at a distance. It might not even be holding hands. It might be that once you have an embrace, one person starts to remove themselves, the other person should immediately do the same, because otherwise it's not reciprocal.
Yeah, we call that calibration in my work. And I you know, it's not just in case you think I'm being hard on Biodanza. I've seen some issues around both of these things in various communities. Like, you know, I was in the 5 Rhythms class the other day. I just walked in and it was take a partner. And I was like, I need to connect to myself first. I've been at a computer working for the last 3 hours and I just want to dance with myself before I take a partner. You know, and for me, there needs to be real full choice there. And sometimes there's a sort of subtle pressure in various dance forms to kind of go into the connecting right away. And it's like, well, I'm not quite ready for that. And then there's just being it strikes me as basic social skills, you know, like if you're in a conversation, it's like, oh, maybe, you know, I should talk more or less. Or does this person want to go now? You know, they're making those signals they want to leave. Or do they want to talk about more or less intimate things? Like that's basic social calibration, you know, and I feel like that still applies, if not more, on the dance floor, right?
Yes, exactly. No, exactly. I mean, it is part of social skill. And for those maybe who haven't developed that as much, they can, you know, explore it and they're getting feedback from other people. You know, if they do overstep boundaries, it's going to be clear with body language or various aspects. I mean, I think the problem for many with Biodanza is that it is actually a group practice. So, you know, you're talking about when you arrived at that class and you didn't want to actually connect with people. I mean, we start as a group. So we start, you know, holding hands in a circle or sharing in a circle so that there's a sense that everybody's as important as each other in the circle. Now, that doesn't mean you have to pretend to be feeling social or, you know, sort of up for it in that sense. But, you know, that is part of the requirement of Biodanza to start and finish as a group.
Yeah. So you know, okay, this is what I'm signing up for here.
Yeah, I think so. I think people understand that, but you know, it doesn't mean you have to fake feeling comfortable, you can bring your own comfortableness into that group.
I think these days I'd probably be a lot more cool with it than I was when I first encountered it 10 years ago as well, because it feels to me like it is like, I had a yoga teacher on and they were saying that the reason they thought yoga had become so popular is because you could do it as a group, but you're on your own little mat, you're not touching anyone, you're not making eye contact, there's no social kind of interaction. Even though there's a group dynamic of everyone together doing something, it's less of an ask than if there's, say, a verbal check-in or a circle with hand-holding. That's a big ask, particularly for British people, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when I started doing it, I was looking at people on the group and the whole practice as weird. So you might think, well, why did I do it? But what I realised was it actually felt fantastic, physically, emotionally, spiritually for me. Even though my head was judging it, my head was going, oh my God, that's really odd. And I don't want to do that. And, all these things were going in my head. But my physical body, which I was trying to give more focus to, was saying, I really like this practice.
And so I only had experienced a few classes and a few different things at festivals. So can you give us, and for listeners, some idea of some of because it's pretty broad, right? Like some of the spectrum of practices that one might do in a Biodanza class?
Yes, no, it's an enormous system. I mean, it's a 3-year training to put it into perspective. And there are so many different dances and different ways of doing them because each piece of music, which is like you marry the music with the dance, but each piece of music has a certain flavour that will actually create a different response. So a very simple dance, which is a bit like in a jive where you hold someone's hands and you do a sort of a rhythmical movement. If you do that to a very bright jazz piece of music, it's going to have a very different effect on the two people dancing as if you do a very sensual piece of music. So, it's all got a massive expanse of expression. But in a nutshell, we try and integrate the session quite well. So it should have individual dances, pair dances, small group dances, and whole group dances. I mean, a really good, we call them vivencias, which is the session name. They should have all those components. As a teacher, I mean, I teach teachers now, and I say to the teachers who are in the training, be very sort of self-aware of what you like, because you almost need to just check in that you're not doing it because you like it, as opposed to what's best for an integrative session and for the group that you're teaching.
Well, I think this is great advice to all listeners who teach. Many of the listeners teach something, and this is a good reminder, to me and anyone else. Is like, okay, who am I serving here? Like, and question one, who am I serving? Is it me? Is it, all the group? And sort of question two, how do my biases actually influence this? Like, I might like heavy metal music. That's maybe not what the group needs right now to relax.
Exactly. And, as a beginning teacher, nobody told me that. So when I started teaching in 2011, and I naturally was very comfortable with transcendence and creativity and effectivity, the touchy sort of caring part. And it was too biased in that. And, it really wasn't great for some people who came to the class. And I apologise if you came to my early classes. I put you through that. But nobody had really sort of, pointed that out to me. And actually, I don't allow myself to put my bias on a group. Although I choose music that I feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I've actually worked very hard on the areas that I'm not confident with. So I wasn't strongly in identity and I wasn't strongly vital when I started doing the training. And I've worked more on those aspects to strengthen them so that I can create and show a more rounded session, really, as well as hold a more rounded session.
And it's being aware of your weaknesses. And I feel like rounding yourself out takes real effort and courage, doesn't it? Like to in your case, maybe to dance to music you don't even like generally, and it's like, well, why don't you like the music? Because it doesn't fit your soma, it doesn't fit your embodiment. When someone says they don't like a type of music, that's not just a neutral aesthetic thing. It's like, for example, I find the chaos quite hard if we take the 5 rhythms model, and I don't really like listening to chaos kind of music because I don't want to be chaotic, and that's actually a place I could really grow into, is letting my hair down a bit more.
Yes, and also it would also, resource you. It would resource you for the times in life when it is chaotic and you haven't got any control of the situation, and you'd be able to navigate it better because you'd learned to navigate it in 5 rhythms. And I mean, I do I do think it's a very good thing to practice things that we find difficult, but not to make the balance like a long suffering thing, like you were talking about the Christian sort of old ethos of, like we have to suffer to be able to grow. Well, no, we have to also think it's worth living. Life is worth living. I want to be here. I'm happy that I've got a chance to have a life, because a lot of the things I'm doing give me pleasure, make me happy, and are full of enjoyment. I think it's very important.
I love that kind of simple but profound building up from self to paired work to group work, because my sense is if you miss one of those out, something is really missed. Whether you do yoga, which is just all self, or tango, which is all paired work, or I don't know, group was just all group work. There are some practices out there where it's just sort of everyone dancing together in a group. Yeah, I don't know, circle dancing or something. And it strikes me as different things to be learned at those 3 levels of connection.
Absolutely. I think it's, it's a bit like a microcosm of the macrocosm, that you, in life, you're an individual, you have intimate relationships of close people in twos, one-to-ones, you have your small social set of friends, which is like the small groups, and then you have society at large, which is the whole group. And really, to be an integrated person who can actually walk through life and be themselves, you need to traverse all of them. You can't elect to miss one out. And I was somebody who couldn't manage groups.
Yeah.
I started when I was in my 20s to do teacher training, and I basically just dropped out of the training because I couldn't.
This is school teacher training, right? I saw this in another interview.
School teacher. Yeah, primary school. And the thought of an assembly with all those eyes on me, I thought I'll never do it. The fear, the uncomfortableness, it was just paralyzing on me, so full on.
Yeah.
I can feel the energy now.
Yeah. So just for our international listeners, an assembly is where the whole school's gathered together in the morning, which is a sort of vital part of any school teacher's job. I think they call it something different in most of the world.
Okay. Yeah,
so that just terrified you, and you thought, I can't be a teacher because of that.
Yes.
Then it sounds like through the sort of dance, you've overcome that fear.
Yes, because I'm now so comfortable in my own skin, because I'm really embodied now. So, it showed me how far I've come. I was teaching at a festival just this last weekend, and we were doing masculine and feminine interaction. And one of the things was to my colleague, he was doing the masculine dance, and he demonstrated dancing his sexual energy as a male, and then the men danced. And then I sort of said, shall I do a demonstration as a female? And all the women, probably everybody shouted yes, So I actually, danced my sexual energy in a group of probably about 60 to 70 people, and, took the space and felt really comfortable, because I'm now deeply in embodiment.
Yeah. Okay, 2 questions. So in terms of, why don't we go to the specific first of all, actually? So in terms of embodying male, did you say male or female, or masculine and feminine? How are you?
Masculine and feminine. I mean, we do know that yin and yang are in both, male and female are in both, genders, but we sometimes separate out, because that's a good experience as well for both genders as well.
And how would you tell us more about those embodiments? I'm just trying to, let's start with the guy first. Like, what was he doing, which, you're categorizing as masculine sexual energy? What kind of movements was he making there?
Well, I mean, obviously he's himself and everyone's different, but, he was really in his hips, sort of sexual energy of, I guess it's, like when you're having sex, sort of movements of that. And really the way he expressed himself was strong movements, direct, clear. But that's his personality as well as, being a man. I mean, because we're obviously the dimension, you have very feminine men and you have very masculine women, and you have, straight people and gay people and bisexual people. And it's all in the whole fullness. And he was one representation, but it's not for people to copy him, but it's to give permission to be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and even though there's of course diversity, I do still think it's okay to talk in generalities, right? Like, while holding, yes, that's a generality. There is something there we can talk about, which is okay to classify as masculine and feminine.
Yes, I think it is still okay to do that, because one of the teachers that I have had some really strong experiences with, who's I think he's from Belgium, Philip Lenave. He says if you're born into a masculine body or a feminine, female body, then when we do that division, you dance what your physical body is, even if you are many other things. In that point, you just do that. It doesn't mean for every other thing you have to express yourself in that way. It's one dance. It's a singular dance.
Yeah.
And that's what he suggests doing. So one woman, I remember saying, well, I want to dance with the men because I feel more like a man than a woman.
Sure.
And he said, actually, I feel you ought to dance as a woman with that because you're in a woman's physicality.
Yeah, I mean, there is I guess, the risk of upsetting some of the postmodernists out on the west coast of America, there is a biological reality. And also, like, I do see more men are masculine and more women are feminine. And if they're not, that's okay. That's cool. I'm not going to bully them. It's okay to be different. But I feel like there's just something about acknowledging, like, most guys I meet have a more yang way of doing things. Most women I meet, and there are some exceptions, and, let's be kind to those people. But there's something about sort of denying there's any kind of correlation between those things, which I think is ridiculous.
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to be inclusive, but equally not to lose the fact that it's also fine to be typical or, the average as well as being on the edges. I think all of it's fine, and it's, you've got to have a place for all of it. And, I, as a woman, if I'm in relationship with a man, the man that I'm with, it tends to make me be more feminine in order to be in a relationship. Whereas, in life, I'm probably very equally masculine and feminine. I'm very competent. I'm very direct. I'm very. I can be very forceful, like men can be, and very active. But when I'm in a relationship, I tend to naturally soften. I don't know why, but I do go more into that feminine energy. So I think it's good to be able to, experience it all, really.
Yeah, and as you say, like to me, any embodiment is relational. And I'm going to go into a certain embodiment people sometimes have listened to my podcast, are surprised when they meet me out in the conference or something because it's slightly different embodiment. And I'm like, well, yeah, because it's partly the situation and the role. And, if I'm interviewing different people, I go into different modes based on sort of what fits with their embodiment. There may be, and certainly sexually, there needs to be some kind of polarity. So it makes sense that we would sort of lean into one side of ourselves.
Yes, I think so. Like you say, it is interrelational, and in the same way things are environmental as well.
Yes.
So the environment always affects you, whether that's people or the actual environment itself. So I think every single situation is unique in that sense.
Yeah, the environment one's an interesting one. So I spend a lot of time on the phone to people around the world, either just walking around or, like now interviewing people. And when they're in the UK, it seems a bit easier somehow because we're probably the weather and certainly the time zone is not so different in Devon than from Brighton. But when I'm interviewing someone in Japan, there's this weird disconnect because they're in such a different physicality.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, and and that's also an interesting thing to explore as well, isn't it? The difference,
Now, you said something before about, now I'm very embodied, and I'm certainly not challenging that. That's, it's your job, and I would make the same claim myself. How do we, and I think it just occurred to me, a great question was, how do we know if we're embodied or not?
Well, on a very basic level, when I was younger, I mean, I actually couldn't feel my weight almost. I didn't really almost feel like I had a body. I felt so light. That's one very obvious thing. But now I'd say that I'm aware, for instance, sitting here, I'm wriggling, and because my bottom's going to sleep a little bit sitting, and so I'm moving because I'm actually both in connection with the physical feeling of every part of my body, from my toes, to my head, and the inner workings of me as well. So it's like, it's not just you're taking your body with you or you're overruling your body. Your body's part of you. And that's what I mean really by embodiment. So I'd be aware of if I was hungry or if I was thirsty and things like that. Yeah,
so do you equate being embodied with having a high level of body awareness generally? I mean, is that the same thing or is there more to it than you? So I first of all, I completely agree with you. So don't hear this as a challenge. Like for me, like as I interview, I'm aware of my feet on the ground, or maybe I'm talking to a friend and I'm aware of my breathing and whatever it is. So there's a definite huge difference from 20 years before, 20 years ago, and I hadn't done the embodied practice in terms of my general body awareness and how much of the day I was tracking that and how, stressful situations I could be in and still track that before losing it as an anchor. I mean, is that the only thing for you in how you kind of say I'm very embodied? Is that what you mean, or is there more to it than that?
Well, that's definitely part of it, and that's the part that probably most people would understand.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm also very aware of a soul being in a physical incarnation. And, certainly in my younger years, I was very aware that I was very comfortable from the heart upwards, of feeling love, of creative expression. I was quite tuned in. I used to do meditation, and I used to do some psychic development work and sound healing and various, quite alternative things when I was younger. And I naturally was very good at it. But the instinctive part and the sexual energy and some of the lower parts of my body, in a way, I almost couldn't feel, I had no circulation hardly in my legs, they were very, very cold, and I feel like I hadn't descended fully into my body. So I think of it for myself also as a soul, but I know that other people don't really think of things in that way, and I don't want to exclude everybody from understanding me, but I mean that's part of it for me as well.
Yeah, so there's the body aware, and I'm really just trying to, a whole part of this podcast is to draw out this question as to what is embodiment, because it's being more and more used as a word, and it seems to be different usage. One is just synonymous with kind of mindfulness or body awareness, and it's something else, that maybe I have some kind of essence or some deeper part of myself, and is that fully physically expressed? Is my markness in any given moment being given life? Like for me, that would be another framing, another thread of like this question of what embodiment is.
Yes, no, I think that you put that very well. I think we all have an essence self, and I feel like conditioning, even before you're born, even in the womb, things that can happen can sort of basically clamp down your natural way of expressing. And I think, part of our journey is just to free ourselves from those limits of expressing ourselves freely and naturally. And I don't mean outside the social context. I'm not talking about, being controversial all the time and confrontational, but I'm just talking about being comfortable to express yourself as you really are without trying to please all the time or trying to fit into some perceived idea of what's wanted of you in a relational sense.
Yeah, and that's the social trap, isn't it? The social trap of, and ironically, people who try and fit in by trying to please, the people pleasing, trying to fit in, trying to be good socially, that sort of over-socialization then leads to them being disconnected from themselves and leads to inauthentic friendships, romance, even marketing. It all becomes bullshitty and alienated because there isn't that fundamental disconnection and fundamental connection to self, and the ability to go against that deep fear of what if the tribe rejects you.
Yes, absolutely. And I come from the place that I was a people pleaser, so it's been a journey away from that, and I think I'll always naturally have an element of that in my nature because I don't like hurting people, but sometimes in order to be authentic and not to collude or compromise myself, I have to.
Yeah. And I found one thing I've started saying recently is when I'm bored in a conversation, I'll just say, and that's very, to bring in the cultural piece, it's very un-English to bring that out. And what I've noticed is that when I do, people nearly always actually, rather than get upset, they normally sort of laugh and go, yeah, it was kind of dull. And then the conversation has life again. And like that's something that's unimaginable to most British people, to say you're bored in the middle of a conversation with someone.
Yeah, that's really brave of you. I don't think I've ever said I'm bored directly to somebody, but I would probably physically remove myself if I really didn't want to be there in some way, or I would just confront the fact that what we were talking about wasn't working for me in some way. Yeah,
I think the British thing is to be avoidant, as you say, isn't it? To sort of go, okay, and make an excuse and kind of go out the side door. And without being accusatory or like you're boring me, like blaming someone else for my feelings, there's something about just kind of saying, what, I know this is a bit socially inappropriate, but this is how I am right now. I mean, even just I'm sad or I'm angry, right? That's, some people don't do that.
No, I know, exactly. But also, I mean, I do believe in self-responsibility. So, I do believe what we're experiencing is about us more than the other person, really. They're mirroring or reflecting something back to you. So, if you really gave your full attention to something, you might find something that's not boring in it as well. I dare just, sort of challenge you slightly there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, yes, that's my job to become interested again. I take that on board as responsibility. And there is a profound narcissism at the heart of people pleasing, which is I'm somehow responsible for what other people are feeling. And I have the full impact of what I do. And obviously there's another extreme, which is what I do and say doesn't matter. But there's a sort of profound narcissism at the heart of people pleasing, which is like I don't want to upset them because I have so much power over their emotions, which, as you say, in terms of self-responsibility, doesn't really make sense.
No, it doesn't. But, if you're very young, and your upbringing has been that you're told that by your significant parents or significant carers, they're saying to you, your behaviour is making me upset or whatever. You actually, for quite a lot of years of your life, I believe you believe that's true.
Yeah.
You have to unpick it. It's not an immediate thing.
Sure, and I'm not blaming anyone for their pattern. We're all fucked up differently, and I've seen a real strong culture and gender pattern in this. Like pretty much every middle-aged English woman that I know has this, like 95%, and I see it far less in, say, I don't know, Israeli teenage boys. Like that sort of that trend is culturally indoctrinated.
Absolutely, and also it's definitely different within different families because each different upbringing creates somebody different. So you are very much a product of your upbringing, not just your parents but your teachers and all the early stuff, and then you can come into awareness and you can start to unpick it and you can start to actually come back to the reality of who you truly are. And it's not a straightforward quick journey, I should say.
Okay, well, this bit of the conversation's got boring, so let's move on.
And I'm not at all threatened by you saying that because I'm really comfortable.
Good. Actually, it's a really interesting thing. Like when I'm listening to podcasts back, the conversations that are really like embodied and engaged and juicy, like, are really interesting, no matter who the speaker is or what's the topic. And actually, the ones where even if the speaker's kind of very well, they look good on paper and they're saying clever things, if they're just repeating something, their marketing spiel, I can hear it. And I'm always just bored when I listen back to those podcasts. So I just invite listeners to notice, like, when they have that feeling listening to podcasts.
Okay, well, that's interesting to see what that will be then.
I think we'll go.
I have a spiel. I mean, I didn't prepare at all for this other than just turn up to be present with myself. So I mean, I think you're talking about mechanical repetition, aren't you, really, which does have no life force at all, does it?
Yeah, really? The sort of pre-rehearsed piece. I think as teachers that can be a problem when I've done something too many times. I've taught a class too many times. It stops being alive. There's a sort of sweet spot when I'm competent but not yet. I'm not yet in that kind of rehearsed mode.
Yes, you have to watch that. I'm sure you're right. The longer you're doing something, the more you have to just check in that you're actually fully present. You're not just running on autopilot, because every situation's different. Different people, different everything. So it shouldn't feel the same, actually.
Yeah, it's different every time. And I think for me, it's always reminding myself, no, this is actually different. It's not the thing you had yesterday. And yes. What's really juicy for you in Biodanza right now? Is there something that's really like, yeah, I'm loving this aspect of it?
Well, I really love teaching teachers they're going to be teachers of Biodanza. I mean, I'm so enjoying that because they're so enthusiastic about the theory that's behind the practice as well. And you can go so much deeper because you've got, I think it's something like 27 weekends of training. And things like myths and archetypes, for instance, you don't really get to do that in a weekly class, even a day workshop very often. But you can do a whole weekend with these people who are coming to learn it. And it's really exciting. And I do like that deep type of mythical stuff. I used to do some storytelling myth weekends with a man in Dartmoor, and it was one of my favourite parts of my life, where you're listening to these oral stories and really connecting with your unconscious self and all those archetypes that pass over the ages.
Yeah, for me, I mean, archetypes are the basis of the embodied yoga system that I teach, and I find that tremendously fascinating. I was just re-looking at the kind of 4 classic masculine archetypes on a YouTube video the other day, and it had all these film movie clips related to these different these 4 classic archetypes. The king, warrior, lover, magician. And I just, even though I've known that work for 15, 20 years, I was looking at it again the other day, and actually the bath, and just loving it. Like, the archetype work is so rich.
Yeah, it is. It's phenomenal. It has an extra power in itself, I think, because it's so universal and it's so timeless, really. And, one of the weekends I did was a whole weekend of the story of Parsifal. And it was a whole weekend on that one story. And it was just one of the best times I've ever had. So, it's incredible. And it shows you things about yourself. The guy who used to teach that, Martin Shaw, he used to say, where are you in the story? Which bit really jumps out at you and things.
Okay, so like maybe in your own hero's journey, are you kind of refusing the call, or are you in the belly of the whale, or
exactly, yeah. Or in the detail. Sometimes it's a detail, isn't it? It's the white rose on the, I don't know, the black ground, or whatever the things are. It could be a detail as well that you're in, and it's what does it mean to you, and why is that speaking to you so deeply? And it's fabulous.
Yeah, there's an interesting question when I'm watching a movie or whatever. It's like, why did that bit make me cry? Or why did that bit jump out at me? Like what's going on with me that's the bit that's jumping out?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we need to be moving towards wrap up here if I'm going to make my train to stinky old London. I'm really not looking forward to the commuter train. Oh, well. So, 2 things to finish. Where can people find out more about you?
So my website is Joys, that's plural, JOYS, of dance.co.uk. There's also a biodanza.co.uk website for the school that I teach with. And also there's an association, I think it's called Biodanza Association, the website thing. But if you Google Biodanza Association UK, you'll get also a website which tells you where classes are throughout the UK, if you're interested. And, I would say to people who want to try Biodanza, try it at least, if you can manage it, try it 6 to 10 times, quite close together, sort of weekly or whatever, because it has a cumulative effect. And once you have the cumulative effect, you actually want to continue with it because you can see how it affects you. And people who do it regularly, seem to just keep with it. I've been doing it for 10 years now.
And it's something about getting past that initial discomfort, particularly if you're sort of newer to embodiment or you're a bit British like us or whatever, it's getting past that initial kind of barrier and actually sticking with it and really realizing there's some real juice in there by the sounds of things.
Yes, I think so. And I think also as you dance with the same people regularly, it really creates a very strong community. And it almost creates an instant community. On one day workshop, I'll find that there's a community there within that day, but it's even stronger when you're dancing with the same people over and over.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of getting a sense of trust and safety to be able to open up to some of the connective work that you guys do, I think that's pretty important, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, that's why the training is so incredible, because it's the same people doing the training for the weekends, once a month, and it's really within about 3 or 4 weekends. I mean, it's a really, really strong bond. It's probably one of the, the closest I've got to people in my life was doing that training when, I did it in 2008 to 2011. And I still am very close to them now if I ever see them anywhere. We live all over the place. But if we see each other, we instantly feel that deep heart love towards each other. It's really strong, really strong.
Lovely. And a closing message about the body.
Listen to it. That's what I'd like to say. Give time to slow down. One of my friends, she's a yoga teacher, and we talk about focusing on the out breath. Slow down the out breath and only focus on the out breath. Allow the in breath to come when it wants to. And she makes me laugh because she says, check that you've got the anus is relaxed. A lot of people hold it.
But listen and relax your tight English ass. That's the recommendation. Exactly. Got it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. More than I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.